Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to welcome you to a new vlog where I read a bunch of novellas for the week. Vlog might be a generous word because I don't know how interesting or aesthetic the in-between pieces are going to be, but it is going to take place over several days. So what sparked the idea for this video is the fact that Tor.com kindly sent me an arc of Into the Riverlands by Nevo, which is the third novella in the Singing Hills series. I think these novellas can technically be read as standalones, but I believe it benefits you to read them in publication order, so I bought the first two for myself, I have the third, and that is the plan for this week. In a very happy coincidence, I also started this week by finishing The Bruising of Kilwa by Nasim Jamnia, which is a queer debut fantasy novella that I enjoyed very much. So I was accidentally on theme with that one, and I will actually be including it as well and talking about it first. So The Bruising of Kilwa is, as I said, a queer debut fantasy novella set in a Persian-inspired fantasy world. It follows a non-binary Aero-Ace refugee healer named Firuz, who has immigrated to the free democratic city-state of Kilwa, where there has been an outbreak of plague as they are searching for work. They're accepted into this free clinic of sorts, and not only are they trying to help and heal as many people as possible, but they're also trying to hide the fact that their healing requires the use of blood magic. This kind of magic was highly stigmatized in their homeland and even part of the reason why their people were persecuted in the first place. It's no longer outlawed, but it's still considered pretty taboo for most folks. So they're contending with that, and there's also a new outbreak of disease that causes mysterious bruising in its victims, and the spread of this incurable, mysterious disease begins to inspire a new rise in anti-immigrant sentiment as well, as it looks like it could possibly be the botched work of some blood magic users. The content warnings I noted were for references to deadly disease, some explorations of xenophobia and anti-migrant sentiments, instances of death, images of decayed bodies, and references to blood, especially in relation to blood magic, some mentions of dysphoria, and one instance of graphic assault. As I said, I really enjoyed this. It was one of my most anticipated releases for this year, and as usual, I have pretty good instincts when it comes to predicting which stories are going to click for me, and we can definitely say that track record continues. This, I feel, has a similar vibe to The Four Profound Weaves. I think they're also published by the same press, so maybe this press has just really solidified their niche. Let me be clear, they are not the same. They are not attempting to even do the same thing whatsoever, but they have a similar culture of magic built into the story, especially one that explicitly makes space for transness. Both stories are also about pursuing a quote-unquote forbidden form of magic that involves the balance between life and death, so I think they're similar in that sense as well. Now to focus on this story, what really stood out to me is the magic system. It's so unique, not in the sense that blood magic is a groundbreaking concept, but every time that magic is used or referenced, it's firmly grounded in real-world science. The author has a scientific background themselves, and that really comes through with how the magic is shown and conceptualized and put to use. It's very practical and takes a lot of actionable, thoughtful, biological factors into account. Thematically, I also like how this story explores the deep-seated bonds between communities and families. There's a great storyline about Firuz taking in this young Sasanian refugee and becoming her mentor as she begins to learn blood magic. And I don't know, it's just really heartwarming to see that kind of mentorship and that continuation of tradition and culture in a story like this. Firuz also has a really complex relationship with their younger brother, who's also trans. They really care about him and work really hard to provide for him, but then there's also a feeling of jealousy between them since Firuz was able to transition back in their homeland and their younger brother hasn't been able to have that same experience. I appreciate the nuance in those relationships. There's closeness, there's trust, there's emotional intimacy, but there's also growing pains and a sense of disconnect as both Firuz's apprentice and their brother are trying to grow on their own terms outside of Firuz's guidance. The other big part of this story is an interrogation of what heritage looks like when there's a complex relationship between two countries, when immigrants are assimilating into one culture as an oppressed or marginalized group, but also the danger of the oppressed inadvertently becoming the oppressors themselves, even to themselves. What I mean by that is that the story kind of questions how far some of these Sasanian refugees will go in order to be accepted in Kilwa, even if it means damaging themselves, their values, their traditions, or even other people in the process. It's really a question of what kind of places we find ourselves led to because of our fear, because of internalized shame or self-doubt, and how do we bring ourselves out of those places. So I liked it. I do think the world building, especially in terms of these complex international politics, could have been integrated a little bit more seamlessly, but other than that, I thought this was well paced. I was invested in the mystery element. I thought the characters were distinctive and interesting, and overall I gave this 4 stars. I have since made it about halfway through The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo, which I'm also enjoying so far. I went into this one not really knowing too much what it was about. I just knew that I had enjoyed Nevo's work before and that I was very appreciative of her imagination, her vision of these really interesting fantasy worlds, and not to mention that this one has been on my TBR for literal years at this point. So what I've discovered as I've gotten into it is that the story follows a young non-binary cleric who's on their way to some sort of palace, I think, and their job is basically to record and preserve these historical artifacts or events for future generations. And they run into this older woman who used to be a handmaiden for the Empress. This was many years ago, and the Empire has since changed hands a few times, but the story alternates between the cleric spending time with this older woman and also these first-person sections where the woman is orally telling her own story of her time in the palace and this unique relationship she struck up with the Empress. The storytelling structure here is very unassuming and a little surprising, but it also really works because you're getting these little glimpses of a larger story that are slowly piecing themselves together, and you just have to trust that gradual process. As the underlying narrative is being excavated, I think that's a really thoughtful parallel to how this cleric goes about collecting pieces of forgotten history and trying to make sense of how they fit into the larger narrative of this world. It's also just a really compelling framework to be receiving and processing the story at the same time the main character is. I think it can definitely be a risky approach that might alienate some readers, but personally I'm reaping the immense benefits and payoff of that choice. I also appreciate this thematic through line of women reclaiming their own history and not allowing themselves to be erased, especially at the hands of patriarchy, which demands their submission, their invisibility, and their silence. So even though the story is really about an empress who was exiled after fulfilling her duty of providing an heir, she still has power, she still has agency, and she's still laying her own plans as she refuses to fade out of existence. I'm interested to see how the story continues exploring that, and I'm definitely going to try to finish it tonight if I can, so wish me luck. Also, some of the clips you're about to see might include the bruising of Kilwa because I started filming my B-roll footage a couple of days ago, but it should all be chronological going forward from this point, so enjoy! Alright, as promised, I did finish Empress of Salt and Fortune last night. It was fantastic. I'll talk about it more in a second. But first, I thought we could take a quick book mail break. I got 2 books in the mail the other day that I thought I would quickly share with you. The first was actually sent to me unsolicited, so it was kind of a surprise. For those of you who don't know, that basically means I was not contacted by the publisher about this book. They did not reach out to me and ask if I wanted a copy. They most likely just went through some kind of database of content creators, chose a few who they thought might be a good fit, and took a shot in the dark. So I got this package at my doorstep that was very thin, but it felt super heavy, and lo and behold, when I opened it, I found a finished copy of a graphic novel I'd never heard of called Over My Dead Body by Sweeney Boo, which is a great author name if you're writing spooky books. I believe this is from HarperCollins, and I think it comes out at the end of August. It's a spooky, witchy comic about this secret academy for witches hidden in the woods, and I believe the main character is mentoring a younger witch, and then that person mysteriously disappears. Everyone else wants to believe the coven is going to find her, but the main character is not convinced, and the more she keeps digging, the more she realizes that this mystery might have something in common with some past unsolved disappearances. Like I said, I don't know much about it. It is a beautiful book. The art looks great. There's really fantastic dark autumnal colors throughout the entire thing. I don't always read unsolicited books, but I do have to admit I am intrigued. The other book I was contacted about, and it may not be a surprise considering who I am and what I do here, but Algonquin kindly sent me a finished copy of Our Shadows Have Claws, which is an anthology of Latin monster stories edited by Jamila Shayed Mendez and my dear nemesis Amparo Ortiz. This comes out on September 6th. It features an all-star roster of Latina authors, including names like Julia Alvarez, Raquel Marí, Gabriela Martins, Alexandra Villasante, Claribel Ortega, Lilian Rivera, and of course the editors themselves, just to name a few. Another really cool thing is that each story has an illustration to go along with it, and they look fantastic. So this one is definitely going to get read, and I'm very, very excited about it. Back to the main event, let's wrap up Empress of Salt and Fortune real quick. I don't have too much to add because I feel like I actually touched on most of the important stuff yesterday, but I did enjoy the ending. I think it's interesting that there's a lot of really strong moves being made towards the end, but the story concludes on a very quietly powerful note that's much more subtle than you might expect. I think it's something that can go either way depending on the reader. Some people might want a more dramatic payoff. I was personally satisfied with it because I think it actually challenges how we frame fantasy narratives. They don't all have to lead up to some big dramatic battle or scandal or murder or transfer of power, what have you. Sometimes things can just sort of simmer to a close. Like I said before, I appreciate the message of taking the time to receive and honor the stories of those around us, especially those that have been historically erased. We get glimpses of this really interesting fantasy world. The prose was lyrical and rich as well. Overall, I enjoyed it. I would give it a solid 4.5 stars. There's nothing quote-unquote wrong with the story that takes away that half star. I just think that if someone were to read this as a standalone, the way it's marketed, they wouldn't be getting the full experience. They might not be satisfied with just this one story on its own, because I think it's clear that there's so much more to this world and to this series. On that note, I have gotten a good start on When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, which is the second book. Again, I just kind of went for it and didn't really read a synopsis, but it definitely has my attention. So what I'm gathering about this series is that each novella is connected by the cleric, Chi, who is continuing their travels in this installment. They're traveling with some companions at the beginning when they're suddenly ambushed by these vicious, ravenous, talking tigers. So Chi begins responding back to them, trying to buy themselves some time, and they decide to do what they do best and stall these tigers with a retelling of some histories. Some quick thoughts so far. It was very easy for me to feel immediately invested in this story. It seems to have higher stakes than the first book just because the first one unfolds more slowly in its own time, whereas there's definitely some pressure being applied in this case. There's a lot of action at the beginning of this story as well, as Chi and their companions are riding these mammoths, and then they're being chased by tigers and trying to rescue people, and then of course trying to stall these hungry, shape-shifting tigers. Obviously, with their lives in the balance, there's a lot at stake. You definitely get the sense that if they say the wrong thing, they could instantly get themselves killed. So it's interesting to see how Chi is going to try and use storytelling as a means to quell violence in this case. There's also been some hints at a thematic through line of exploring truth and the importance of truth, especially in regards to how certain stories and histories are portrayed. Where do we get our stories from? Who are the ones doing the telling, and how does that change things? So yeah, definitely very tense, very interesting so far. I'm really curious to see how Chi is going to go about telling this story as a way to barter for their life. So I'm going to keep reading, and hopefully I can finish this one and at least start the third novella today. That is the goal. So I'm going to try to do that, and then I will check back in. Alright, be proud of me because I have done the thing. I have read all 3 books. Let's start with When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain because I need to wrap up my thoughts on this one, but this was my favorite of the bunch by a significant margin. This was very much my shit. All 3 novellas so far in this series have this aspect of oral history, this feeling of fantastical folklore that's being spun in real time. But I just really love the story within the story of this book. Absolutely feral sapphics who would go to the ends of the earth for each other and who would rip apart anyone who so much as tries to harm their soulmate? Yes, please. So that was great on its own. Like, if that was the entire story, it would have been an easy 5 stars for me already. But I also really love the storytelling mechanic employed in this installment. In the first book, the dual storytelling comes into play because Chi is spending time with this older woman who's slowly telling her story piece by piece as the days go on. But this method is much more immediate because you actually see how the story is changing in real time as Chi and the tigers exchange their different versions. So Chi will be telling the story and then the tigers will interject when they've gotten something wrong, and then they will fill in the corrected version themselves. So it's definitely a cultural exchange happening in real time, and it's fascinating to see how these different perspectives change what the story means. For Chi, this story has been passed down to them by other humans, and there's obviously a bias against the tiger character in the story that's been shaped out of fear and the understanding that tigers are quote-unquote vicious and inherently violent, which may or may not be true depending on the situation. So then it's also funny to see the tigers be completely outraged because they're like, dude, they're in love. It's obvious. Because of that back and forth, because you get to see how these different details and perspectives color the story as it's being told, I feel like you get a much richer storytelling experience. I also just love how hearing this story is enough to keep these tigers entertained to the point where they won't kill Chi or their companion, because that just makes sense. It makes sense that they're riveted by this story that involves one of their own historical figures. It makes sense that they would be drawn to it because it gives them a sense of recognition and fulfillment. And like I said yesterday, there was definitely this question about the importance of truth when it comes to storytelling. Is truth something that can be definitive, or does it change based on what different people believe, and who are the ones who get to do the telling when it comes to preserving stories or histories? Do we accept something as truth just because that's the way it's always been told to us? And if not, when and how do we give ourselves space to finally question those things? So overall, everything in this story just worked for me. I loved every single page and I gave it 5 stars. Then between last night and this morning, I also finished Into the Riverlands, which is the 3rd companion novella in this series that I believe comes out on October 25th. Like the other 2, I just kind of went into this without knowing too much. Once again, we're following Cleric Chi as they visit the Riverlands to record stories of the legendary immortal martial artists who are said to haunt the region. As they're traveling, they fall in with a pair of young women and an older couple, and they all decide to continue traveling together, especially to keep themselves safe from bandits. And they are definitely met with quite a bit of unexpected danger along the way. It shouldn't be much of a surprise by now, but I also really enjoyed this. I appreciate that each of these novellas has such a different flavor, so to speak. Like, the first one is a slow burn story about court politics, the second one is about trying to stall some hungry shape-shifting tigers and bartering histories, and this one is more of an action-packed journey through the jungle with a lot of martial arts. For Nivo to be able to dip into all these different fantastical archetypes, but still maintain this consistent conceptual and thematic thread that's held together by one really distinctive character is really kind of an amazing feat. Also, the way stories within stories function and the act of storytelling itself is also inherently different from one book to the next. So this one is more about the characters swapping stories as they travel together, not only as a means to pass time, but also to gain a better understanding of the landscape they find themselves in. Therefore, the question this novella is posing is about how stories can shape and deepen our understanding of the world around us and the people around us. Like I said, this installment is also a bit more action-forward, which sets it apart from the previous 2, but not in a way that's necessarily unwelcome. That aspect, paired with the fact that this installment is the shortest of the 3 so far, makes it feel very exciting and fast-paced. So I liked it. I still like When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain more, but that could just be a matter of taste, and that does not mean that this novella was unsuccessful by any means. I would still give it a solid 4.5 stars. So with that, I have caught up on the Singing Hills cycle so far. I have thoroughly enjoyed my time in this world, and I know there are more books being planned at this point, so I'm really excited to see where Nivo's brilliant mind takes us next. With that, I'm going to officially wrap up this vlog. Thank you so much for coming with me on this journey. I hope you enjoyed hearing about these 4 queer novellas written by queer authors, and if you've read them yourself, or if you plan to, feel free to sound off down below in the comments. But that's everything I had to share with you for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.